Now, the great thing about Konnect Radio is that we connect, see what I did there, with people who have faith and people who may have no faith whatsoever. And I wonder, whatever side of the fence you're on, if you found this to be the case when some religious people, they tend to be and think that they're morally superior. So, Tom, is this the case? And if so, what are we doing wrong? And how do we answer that question?
Thank you, Gareth. Why do some religious people think that they're morally superior? This might have arisen from our experiences of individual religious believers, but sometimes it can also be from looking at a broader picture. I think many people are rightly disgusted with abuse and the way that churches have responded to abuse. And so they have walked away from the church, from religious belief, and vowed never to go back. I have met hundreds and hundreds of people who have expressed this. They're outraged, they're appalled, they're disgusted, and quite frankly, they have every right to be. Now, the moral impulse here is right, but the assumption that God feels any less outrage is not. In fact, without the limitations of human vision, which limit our judicial processes, or the escape of death, God actually holds every single person to account. Every single person to account for what they've said and what they've done, or what they haven't done. But we have also this sense in us that the Christians and the church ought to be better. They ought to reflect a more healthy use of power, that they should reflect something of the goodness of God. We expected more from Christians and from the church and from religious believers. We expected a community that cared about bringing things into the light more than self-protection. But why did we expect these things? Why did we expect goodness in the lives of Christian believers? Why did we expect the church to be better? Why did we expect religious communities to be more interested in bringing things into the light? Did we think that if God was real, then some of his goodness ought to be visible in the community and people who profess to enjoy proximity with him? The church isn't a staircase that leads slowly through religious devotion up to God and heaven. It's actually a field hospital where Jesus is the medic in the tent on the ground. Now, although Jesus said that his followers ought to be recognizable by their different ways of life, he himself claimed to be that life. And the contact that Jesus made with humanity was transformative and it was life-changing. And he can bring transformation to how we behave, but he wasn't really interested in teaching a new system of behavior or a better way of living. Instead, he presented himself as the way. Jesus actually put something before transformation and before change. And the thing he puts in front of everything else is friendship with God. This opens up a doorway to a new power and a new connection to live. And the doorway here is through him, and on our part, through humility and confession. This is the absolute bedrock of true Christianity and true religious belief and true spirituality. It's not about believing in yourself. It's about believing in Jesus. It all starts with acknowledging and not improving. So Jesus told this story called the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. And here's how the story goes. To some who were very confident of their own righteousness, to some people who thought they were very good and looked down on everybody else, exactly those superior religious believers, Jesus told the parable. Two men went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee who does everything right religiously, and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. God, I thank you that I'm not like the other man, like these other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He couldn't even look up to heaven. He beat his chest and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Jesus summarizes this parable by saying, I tell you that the second man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. The superior religious professional was out in the cold. The humble man, who knew and acknowledged that he was broken and in need of forgiveness, was welcomed in. Anybody who has the tiniest understanding of Jesus, who's truly begun to understand that forgiveness that Jesus offers has no claim to moral superiority. If anything, for me, the longer I've been a Christian, I don't know if you feel the same, Gareth, but the longer I've been a Christian, the more in need of forgiveness and grace I realize I really am. And forgiveness is right at the center of Christ's message. It's not about trying to be good for a God who resembles more of a speed camera, catching us when we do things wrong rather than a friend. God isn't a speed camera who looks for behavior. God is a friend called Jesus, who's closer than a brother. The moral outrage that we all feel at religious hypocrisy, abuse, failures to address abuse, is a clue that we hoped for the church to be a cleaner mirror reflecting God's goodness to the world. The dirt and the dust on the mirror's surface that stop it reflecting God's nature to us don't make God untrue. I think they indicate that the diagnosis, what's wrong with human nature, that it's corrupted and glorious, is more needed than ever. It shows us that that diagnosis is true. Although many understand Christianity to be an ethical system of moral improvement, and therefore religious believers see themselves as somewhat superior from practicing it, it is exactly the opposite. It's about admitting that no system that we employ on our own can work, and it's about admitting our need for help, like the tax collector. I'm not a good man, Gareth. I make mistakes frequently, but I have been forgiven.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think what a lot of people struggle with is almost admitting that actually they aren't good people. And I think it can take a long time for some people to do that. And I think that one of the most damaging things that the church and Christians can do is to go to church on a Sunday, praise God, and then during the week, they aren't representing the Christian faith at all. So basically their lifestyle, how they act, doesn't represent Jesus Christ at all, but it does on a Sunday when there's other Christians there to actually look at it, but it doesn't during the week.
I mean, what's interesting is that if we actually look at the teaching of the Bible and the teaching of Jesus, there is no instruction there to sort of to think that you're better. In fact, the instruction is the other direction, to think that you're in a worse position. Because at the center of that, of Christ's message, and at the center of Christianity is not, it's not a moral system. In fact, the law in the Old Testament, the law, the 10 Commandments, the moral instructions are better understood as being something that makes us aware of how much we need forgiveness, or a framework through in the middle of which, like a scaffolding or a trellis through which real life can grow. The system itself is not the thing. So if you have like the highway code with driving cars and speed limits, the driving experience is not found in the highway code. It's found in actually enjoying your car or carefully using your car. And you can use it in damaging ways, but actually the life is not the system. The life is what happens within the framework, and that life is Christ.
Thank you very much, Tom. And it's always great to have you on and to just have people like you who we can bounce these things off. Now, if you're struggling at the moment with any of these questions, please don't feel like you can't ask. You know, we heard earlier on, in fact, that the Archbishop of Canterbury admits that there's been times in his life and his journey that he's had doubts and he's had questions, and Tom said the same and I've said the same. So this will always be a safe place for you to ask your questions and send them through. There are no silly questions. And if there are, then I tend to ask them anyway on the radio first. So send them through. What would you like us? What are you struggling with at the moment? You know, maybe you've read something in the Bible and you've gone, well, where do I stand with this? What do I do with that? How do I wrestle this? The great thing about the Christian faith is it's open to these conversations. So studio@konnectradio.com, send it through to us, and we could be featuring your question next week.